Memphis, Tennessee, March 1974. The training floor of a converted warehouse on the east side of the city, 43 feet wide and 61 feet long. The kind of space that smelled permanently of canvas and sweat and the particular silence of men who had spent years learning how to hurt each other. 41 fighters and coaches had gathered that afternoon. Not a competition. Not a demonstration. A closed-door working session between serious men who had agreed, in advance, that what happened inside those walls would stay there. Bill Wallace was 26 years old, 6 feet even, 172 pounds of fast-twitch muscle over a frame that moved like something had been wound too tight and released without warning. He held the Professional Karate Association middleweight championship. He had not lost a professional bout anywhere to anyone. His left leg was not a leg. It was a surgical instrument. Coaches from across the country had studied film of that kick and still could not locate the moment it left the chamber. They called him Superfoot. They called him that because nothing else covered what the leg did. His specialty was not power. Power was ordinary. His specialty was the interval between decision and impact. Most fighters in the world operated in a reaction window of roughly 180 milliseconds from stimulus to response. Bill Wallace had been clocked in documented testing at a biomechanics facility in Nashville at 72 milliseconds from chamber to full extension on his left roundhouse kick. That is not a fast kick. That is a kick from a different category of human movement entirely. He had come to Memphis to train with serious people. Chuck Norris was in the room. What happened next would be talked about in dojos across North America for the next 30 years. And when the last witness from that warehouse was asked about it decades later, his answer was always the same. He said, "I have been in rooms with great fighters my entire life. I have never seen a man do what Chuck Norris did that afternoon in the space of 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That is how long it lasted." And if you want to understand what those 3 minutes actually contained, stay where you are. Because what happened in that warehouse explains something about this man that no tournament record and no film reel has ever fully caught. If this is the kind of storytelling that belongs in your evening, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from. There are people from 40 countries in this community. We would like to know where you are. Bill Wallace had been moving through the room for the better part of an hour. He was not warming up. He was working. There is a difference. Warming up is preparation. Working is demonstration and refinement and the quiet testing of other men's attention. He was doing the latter. Every sequence he threw was clean and complete and arrived at its terminus with a sound that did not invite response. The coaches on the benches watched without commentary. When a man is doing something that well, words feel like an interruption. The left leg was the thing. It was always the left leg. His right side was serviceable, technically sound, the product of discipline rather than gift. But the left leg was something he had been born with and then spent 8 years making worse for everyone around him. The roundhouse came from a chamber that sat slightly lower than convention taught, which meant the angle of arrival was unexpected even when the target knew it was coming. The hook kick rotated through a plane that other fighters simply did not guard because they had never needed to guard it against anyone but him. The side kick was the simplest of the three and the most punishing, because it arrived in a straight line while the eyes were still processing the roundhouse. Tony Tulliners was sitting on a bench against the east wall. Tulliners was not a casual observer. He had placed in national tournament competition and understood at a technical level what he was watching. He later recalled that he spent the first 40 minutes of that session simply cataloging what Bill Wallace's left leg could reach from a standing position. He said the answer, when he had finished the catalog, was unsettling. He said, there was almost nowhere you could stand. Chuck Norris was at the far end of the room. He had been there since the session opened. White t-shirt, dark canvas trousers, no rank insignia, no association patch, nothing that named him to anyone who did not already know. He had a cup of coffee at his right side that he had not touched in some time. He was watching Bill Wallace work. The two men had been in the same competitive orbit for years without a moment like this one. They knew each other the way that competitors at the top of a small world know each other, by result and reputation and a mutual recognition that is not quite respect and not quite rivalry, but something that contains elements of both. They had not, before this afternoon, stood across from each other in a working session with no audience criteria and no formal structure. That was about to change. Bill Wallace finished a combination. He let the leg settle. He turned to the room. He was looking for something specific, in the way that a man who has been the best in his space for long enough begins to need something beyond demonstration to remain interested. He found it when his eyes reached the far end of the floor. He said something to the man nearest him. The witnesses who were close enough to hear gave different accounts of the exact words, the way witnesses always do, but the substance was consistent. He indicated Chuck Norris. He said something to the effect that he wanted to find out what the man could handle. He was not asking, he was announcing. There was a shift in the room. Not dramatic, not loud. The kind of shift that happens when people who understand what is about to occur recognize it before it has been named. 3 coaches on the south bench straightened without deciding to straighten. A fighter who had been stretching on the far left stopped and did not resume. The room did not hold its breath. It simply became more present. Bill Wallace walked across the floor toward Chuck Norris. He did not ask. He did not gesture toward the open space in the center. He covered 12 feet of floor and then the left leg came up out of nothing. At full speed, no extension of courtesy, no preliminary movement that announced itself, and the roundhouse arrived at the side of Chuck Norris's head from a direction that had not existed in the visual field 1 moment before it occupied it. Phil Carver was standing 8 feet to the left of the impact point. He later described what he saw in terms that a man uses when he has decided that accuracy matters more than modesty. He said, "The kick was real. Full speed. Full intent." He said, "I have seen Bill Wallace kick a great many times, and what I saw that afternoon was not a demonstration kick." He said, "I have no explanation for what happened next." Chuck Norris moved. Not away. Not back. Laterally, 41 inches to the right. One movement, no preparation visible from the outside. The kick passed through the space his head had occupied. The sound it made passing through empty air was the sound that it would have made arriving. The leg completed its arc and came to rest, and Bill Wallace was already resetting, and the reset took 4/10 of a second, and in those 4/10 of a second Chuck Norris had arrived at a position that was not available to the kick. Second one. The hook kick came immediately after. This was Wallace's combination. The roundhouse to open, the hook kick to collect what the roundhouse had moved. The hook arrived on a rotational plane that tracked the expected position of a retreating target. Chuck Norris was not retreating, he was at a distance that made the hook kick structurally unavailable. Not blocked, not parried. Unavailable, like throwing a punch into a room where the door has been closed. Tulliners, from the East Bench, said later that he felt cold when he understood what he was watching. He said Chuck moved to a position where the kick could not follow him. Not by speed, by geometry. This is the part that requires a pause. Because it is the part that explains the 3 minutes. A fight is not 2 men hurting each other. A fight is a conversation about distance. Most fighters speak that language at a conversational level. A few speak it fluently, an extremely small number speak it as a native tongue, the way that certain people are born knowing something without having been taught it. What Chuck Norris understood about distance was not the same thing that other fighters understood. He did not manage distance. He inhabited it. He understood, at a level that operated below conscious decision, where a technique could reach and where it could not, and he placed himself on the far side of that line before the technique had finished selecting its target. Bill Wallace understood this 30 seconds into the exchange. This was clear from the witnesses who watched his face. He was not frustrated. He was recalibrating. He adjusted his opening distance. He changed the entry angle of the roundhouse. He added a feint before the combination to disturb the read. He did this with the speed and intelligence of a man who had spent 8 years solving problems with that left leg and had confidence, earned through evidence, in his ability to solve this one. Second 47. The sidekick came off a feint that would have worked against almost anyone else in the room. The entry feint moved Chuck Norris's weight a fraction of an inch toward his left heel. The sidekick came in straight on the line the feint had opened. 12 witnesses saw it. Of those 12, 11 said afterward that they believed, at the moment of launch, that the kick would land. It did not land. Chuck Norris's right hand came forward, not to block, not to catch, to redirect. He placed the edge of his forearm against the shin of the incoming kick at a point 9 inches from the ankle and applied pressure along the lateral axis. The kick did not stop. It continued. But it continued along a different line. The line it continued on carried it past his left hip with 8 inches of clearance. The force of the kick went fully through the technique and into nothing. What the forearm had done was not a block. A block opposes force. What the forearm had done was agree with the force and suggest a different direction. The kick had been given exactly what it was asking for and the answer had been useless. Pat Johnson was standing near the south wall. He later said that the moment the sidekick was redirected was the moment the room understood what was happening. He said, "You could hear people exhale. Not from relief, from the recognition of something." He did not stretch. He did not smile. He did not acknowledge the room. He stood at the distance he had chosen and waited for what came next. What came next was the combination that Bill Wallace believed could not be read. He had thrown it 1,400 times in training and some number of times in competition, and it had worked at a rate that had made him the champion he was. The roundhouse to the lead side of the head, the hook kick to the opposite side, the side kick as the closing argument. He threw it now at a speed that Carver later said was the fastest he had seen it thrown in any context. The roundhouse opened the combination. Chuck Norris slipped it. The hook kick followed. Chuck Norris was not there. The side kick came last. Chuck Norris stepped inside it, not past it, inside it. He was close enough that the kick had no range to operate in. At that distance, a side kick is not a kick, it is a shin pressed against a hip. Bill Wallace felt the absence of impact and felt, simultaneously, Chuck Norris's right hand rest against the left side of his jaw. Not a strike, a placement, an indication. The hand rested there for approximately 1.5 seconds. The message was exact and required no translation. The strike had been pulled. 1 inch, maybe less. The hand rested where the impact would have been and then withdrew. The two men stood at that distance, 3 feet. The room was entirely still. Phil Carver said later that he did not breathe for the duration of what happened next. He said he does not know how long that was. He said it felt longer than it was. Chuck Norris took 1 step back. He lowered his right hand. He looked at Bill Wallace with an expression that Tulliners described as neither warm nor cold. He said something in a voice that did not carry to the benches. 3 words. The witnesses nearest to the exchange gave slightly different accounts, but the consistent version was this. He said, "Good left leg." That was all. Bill Wallace stood where he was. He was breathing, not laboring. Processing, he looked at the floor once. The way a man looks at the floor when he is deciding something privately that he has not yet decided. Then he looked up. He extended his right hand. The handshake lasted 2 seconds. Then Chuck Norris picked up his coffee from the mat where he had set it, walked to the bench along the north wall and sat down. He did not speak to anyone about what had just happened. He did not narrate it. He did not receive the room's attention with any visible acknowledgement. He sat down and after a moment he drank his coffee. Bill Wallace stood in the center of the floor for a moment longer. Then he walked back to the space where he had been working and resumed working. The session continued. The coaches on the south bench did not speak to each other about what they had seen. Not that afternoon. The speaking came later, in other cities, in other training rooms over the months and years that followed, in the way that a story which cannot be fully explained requires repeated retelling to come closer to explanation. Tulliners told the story first, in a dojo in San Diego to 3 fighters he trusted. He told it without embellishment, which is harder than it sounds when the facts are already extraordinary. What he told them was what he had seen and he declined to offer analysis beyond the facts. He said, I do not know what to call what happened, I know what I saw. The story spread the way these stories spread. It moved from dojo to dojo, from coach to student, accumulating the small distortions that oral history always accumulates while retaining, at its center, the core of what had actually occurred. Some versions added a third exchange, some versions changed the venue or the year, some versions changed which witnesses were present. The version that persisted longest and most accurately among the people who had actually been in the warehouse was the simplest one. A man with the fastest kick in the sport threw it at full speed without warning, and the man he threw it at was somewhere else when it arrived. In 2009, a martial arts journalist asked Bill Wallace about that afternoon in Memphis. Wallace did not decline the question. He did not minimize it. He considered it for a moment, and then he said what he said. He said that in his career he had faced a great many skilled opponents, and that most of them had tried to beat the left leg. He said Chuck Norris had done something different. He said Chuck Norris had simply declined to be where the left leg was going. He said this in a tone that contained, plainly, the respect of one serious man for another. He was asked if he had learned something from the exchange. He said yes. He was asked what. He said, I learned that speed answers one question, distance answers a different question. And the second question is more important. What happened in that warehouse in Memphis in 1974 was not a fight. It was a demonstration, arrived at by accident, of the difference between being the best at a technique and understanding the geometry that makes a technique necessary. Bill Wallace was the best in the world at the first thing. Chuck Norris had spent 20 years studying the second. The lesson is not complicated. What a man can do, and what the man across from him can do, are not the only variables in the room. The space between them is also a variable. The man who controls the space controls the terms. The man who controls the terms determines what the speed is worth. That is the lesson from Memphis. And it was not learned by the man on the mat, it was learned by everyone who heard the story afterward. Next week we will talk about the afternoon in Los Angeles when a director told Chuck Norris that the fighting in his films was not convincing. We will talk about what Chuck Norris did, and we will talk about what the director said about it for the rest of his career. That one is worth staying for.